Welcome to the Black Entrepreneur Experience Podcast, inside the business, buzz, and brilliance of Black entrepreneurs. Here is your host, Dr. Frances Richards.
Innovative Thinker, episode number 454. Innovative Thinker. Thank you for joining us as we elevate the Black entrepreneur experience by interviewing CEOs, thought leaders, innovative thinkers, and Black entrepreneurs across the globe. I'm your host, Dr. Frances Richards. Our next guest is founder of the Everything Senior Insurance Company, host of the 7-Figure or Bust podcast, author and mentor to thousands of agents. Welcome, Christian Brindle.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. Big fan of the show.
Thank you. I've given our audience such a brief bio. Why don't you fill in the gaps and share with our audience what you'd like them to know about you and your company?
I run what I would best describe as an insurance conglomerate at this point. So we are an insurance agency that specializes working with mostly health and life products, individual products. We kind of specialize more than anything else in Medicare health plans for seniors, but we also do under 65 health insurance plans. We do life insurance plans. And so we have a combination of a very successful internal agency where we have thousands of our own clients, a very large team internally, but we also work with other insurance agents where we partner with them across the country and kind of teach them how they can kind of replicate some of the success that we've been having over the years in our agency and kind of mentor them. And in exchange, they partner with us and we make an override when they do end up being able to sell policies. We also own a lead company for insurance agents. We own a virtual assistant company for insurance agents. We own an event company where we put on a yearly conference for agents, and then we own a training and consultant company for agents. So that's why I say insurance conglomerate. It's all kind of one company, but it's broken up into different parts and subsidiaries.
Tell us your backstory. How did you get into the insurance industry?
Well, my father was a Medicare agent actually for 25 years before I ever got in. I got in at the beginning because he was in and, he kind of encouraged me to get my license and kind of, get into the industry. And so he told me at the time, he's like, you're good with people. You like people. I think you'd be good at this. At the time, I was 21 when I got my license and first got started in the insurance business. I'm 32 today, so I'm in year 11. So I got my license and at the beginning, I started working with my dad and in that way. And so I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't think of it probably too much more than, an opportunity. And I didn't really quite know what I wanted to do in my life. I'd kind of bounced around a little bit. I dropped out of college after a semester. So I didn't really go anywhere with the whole college experience. And when I got into the business, it was kind of love at first sight. I realized that I really had a passion for it. I thought it was an avenue where not only could I make a lot of money, I could achieve a lot of success, but I could also help people while doing it. Insurance and healthcare in general, as I'm sure you know, Francis, is such a complicated thing in people's lives. And I think the average person really needs a lot of help navigating it. And then once they have a policy, like getting it to work the way that they were promised that it was going to work. I found a passion for that very quickly. And I built my company over the years. I worked really hard and yeah, but that's ultimately how I found it, actually, was my father was in it first. He had a little local agency, had an office, had a part-time assistant for many years. And, it kind of ended up working out to where probably about 3 years ago, my company ended up buying his company so he could retire. And I just worked really hard. My company, by the time I was 4 or 5 years in, my company was bigger than his. But ultimately, it all kind of started because my dad was in it and he made the recommendation that maybe I should give it a shot.
That's awesome. What is a lesson that you wish you knew before starting your business?
Oh, that is such a great question. I love it. Man, there's so many that come to mind, but if I had to narrow it down to one, I would say a lesson that I wish I knew is I, like a lot of young entrepreneurs, came in feeling like I could take over the world with my own efforts alone. Not to say that you can't do great things with your own efforts alone, but it took me a very long time to understand that a business is only as good as the support staff, the support team, its ability to run efficiently, like with, good systems, being able to automate certain processes, and being able to look at things and know your numbers from a very detailed standpoint, so you know what to cut off and what to not spend money on and what to not put focus on, to know what works. I think for me, what I wish I knew at the beginning that I think would have helped me quicker than maybe it did in my journey is just to understand that I think knowing your numbers, efficiency, those things, and being willing to hire people and understand that you do need help. You can't do everything by yourself. There's only 24 hours in the day. And if I have a company that has 15 employees, let's say, versus somebody that's operating a business and they're the only employee in the business, no matter how good they are, no matter how hard they work, my company with 15 is probably going to accomplish a lot more in a day than they can. And so it took me a while to learn that. And so those would be the ones that come to mind for me.
And thank you for that. And speaking of that, with you being a millennial, talking about hiring and as a CEO owner of a company, talk to the business owners out there that's having a little bit of challenge in reference to finding good employees. How are you vetting your employees?
Yeah, great question. And it is a challenge, right? It's probably more of a challenge today than probably at any other point. I mean, for us, I feel like there's a few areas that we really concentrate on. Number one, we want to be an attractive place to work. I don't think people talk about that enough. If you want to attract high quality talent, I think you have to be a desirable destination for people. So how do you do that? Well, number one, first off, are you this might sound obvious to many of your listeners, but are you paying a competitive wage for the job that you're hiring for in your area? But not only that, like what kind of incentives do your employees get, right? Do they have ability to move up? Is there opportunity to move up over time? One thing we've done internally is anytime we have a new position that becomes available, like let's say a leadership position or a more desirable position, instead of going out and hiring new talent for that, we'll typically promote from within and then rehire to replace that old position that they're giving up, right? So like making it a really desirable destination, I think for folks is a really, really important thing. Like I don't think you can really undersell that, because if it's not a good place to work and that's visible from the outside looking in, people aren't going to want to work for you, right? Like we've had people that we've hired in our company that have really sought us out because of our reputation in the marketplace. So that's number one. I think number two, though, even if you do all of those things correctly, you can still hire the wrong person and it's tough to vet people, right? So what we've found over the years is, number one, doing multiple interviews is a good thing. One thing we actually recently started doing that I think's helped a lot is a lot of what we do and the positions we hire for require somebody to be able to talk over the phone, whether they're doing customer service or whether they're doing sales or any of those things. So we started doing phone or Zoom interviews on the first interview with one person. And then if we like that person or we felt strongly that they were a good person, we have them come into the office for a second interview. The reason why this has been helpful is most businesses have probably ran into this if you've been hiring. For us, if we get 10 resumes, and let's say we called all 10 to come in for an interview, only 5 would call us back. And out of the 5 we're able to book, only half of those, so maybe 2 or 3 of those would actually show up to their interview. The rest would no show. So by doing the phone interview, it's not as much of a downer or as much of a time suck if they don't show up for their phone interview. So by doing those multiple interviews and having different people in the interviews, we're getting multiple perspectives. We're seeing that person in 2 different settings, once over the phone, once in person. So we kind of get a good idea for what their skill sets might be in that regard. We also do background checks. Every position, we're a very big fan of background checks. And again, like one thing I've learned over the years, and I still don't think I'm a great assessor of talent, if I'm being completely self-aware. Like I think for me, what's really helped me is when I have people in my company that are really good judges of character, bringing them into the interview process and getting their opinion and valuing their opinion on people has helped me a lot, because a lot of the bad hires we've made, I made. For me, it just kind of came down to understanding, okay, maybe I'm not great at like picking people out and being like, okay, I think you're this. Maybe other people are better at that in my organization. And I think the last thing I would say on that is understand that people are going to put their best foot forward in the interview. They're as good as they're ever going to be in that setting, right? The second best they'll ever be is their first day of work. Kind of all, they want to impress. If you're underwhelmed in the interview, even a little bit, listen to that because chances are it's not going to get better. If the interview's underwhelming, that's them putting their best foot forward. That's the best version of themselves they can give you. And so that should say something, I think.
Talk about your top two influencers, mentors, and what lessons did they teach you?
Yeah, man, I have so many people that I've learned from over the years, but I'll talk about two in particular that are maybe not insurance industry specific, because I want to talk about names that your audience might be familiar with. Early on in my career, I was a big Grant Cardone guy, very, very into his trainings. I read all his books. I went through his courses. I did all kinds of training and kind of just devoured his content early on. I think what he helped me realize is back then, a decade ago, he was really teaching, he wasn't teaching real estate investing as much as he is now. He was really a sales guy, a marketing guy, and a promotion guy, and a scaling your business guy. And those are all the lessons that I needed to learn. He taught me that getting attention for your business is good. If nobody knows you, they can't buy things from you. They can't do business with you. And I think that's a great lesson. Simple, but a good lesson. I learned a lot about social media marketing from him, content creation marketing, which is a big part of what we do today. And also just the value of sales and embracing sales. Selling doesn't mean you have to rip people off or anything like that. So he's a big one. Another one for me, probably Gary Vaynerchuk, because a big part of what we've done on all sides of our business is we've really embraced social media and content creation and branding our business in multiple different ways. Gary Vaynerchuk was a big one in terms of that. There's also a lot of mentors I've had that are in the insurance space, other agency owners, people in that space. So I probably have a list a mile long, to be honest with you, but those are two that come to mind.
And what was that aha moment when you knew your business was going to be successful?
This might be kind of scary for anybody listening that is just getting started in their business or they're thinking about getting started in their business. For me, I don't feel like I really had that moment where I'm like, wow, this is really going somewhere until I was 5 or 6 years in. Not to say that we didn't have wins before that, because we certainly did, but it's hard to see the real long-term vision of a business when you're piling up smaller wins, right? I call them singles and doubles, right, in your business. Not necessarily home runs, they're singles and doubles. They still put points on the board, right? But they're not as sexy. They don't make ESPN highlight reels as much, right? And I feel like once you get to the point where you really start, you've built a foundation. I feel like the hardest part of building a business is building the foundation. And you kind of do that in the early years of a business. I feel like you really scrap and claw and grind it out. At that point, the business was probably doing only a couple $100,000 a year. But at that point, to see kind of the options that were starting to open up for us and the directions we could go and be like, okay, this thing could become really big. I think that was kind of the aha moment for me that didn't come until we were already pretty established. You don't feel the overwhelming progress from small progress compounding over time. It doesn't, you know what I mean? It's almost like when you're losing weight, for example, right? If someone's on a diet, you're losing weight, like you don't notice your change every day when you're looking in the mirror because you saw yourself the night before, right? Or the day before or anything like that. So, but over a 6-month period, you show yourself a picture of yourself versus what you look like today. You're like, wow, I look different. That's crazy. It's kind of like that in your business too. So for me, it was really once we started to get established and when I started to realize the paths that we could go that could really blow the business open, that we just didn't have options in terms of that early on.
And you talked about wins. Let's take a snapshot of the last 30 days. What was your biggest?
I think our biggest win in the last 30 days is one thing we've really got involved into in our business, and something I've been talking a lot about in the last 12 months or so, and that's making power moves in your business, right? Like when you get to a certain point, when you're at maybe a 7-figure revenue point, what are the power moves you can make to really leapfrog you and help you grow faster and reach the next level a little quicker instead of it taking years, right? So for us, one of those power moves we started really leaning into was buying other agencies, buying other insurance agencies from agents that wanted to get out of the business for whatever reason. So for us, in the last 30 days, we closed on a deal. I think we paid in the ballpark of about 200 grand to acquire another insurance agency. And we got a really, really strong, really great deal on it. It was probably worth quite a bit more than that. That would probably be the biggest power move in the last 30 days. It's not the first time we did something like that, but it was the first one we did this year. So it was kind of exciting to get that out of the way and get that done.
Congratulations on that. And that was
Thank you.
you kind of parlayed into when you opened and you talked about you have a leads company, you have an events company, you have an administrative. Talk about adding those different companies in. At what point did you start adding them and why?
I think this ties really nicely to what I was talking about in that last question as well, and that's that power moves conversation, right? So for me, to give you a quick timeline, I originally created the insurance agency, and that was all that I did for probably the first 6 years of the history of the business. As time went on over the next couple of years, I created the consulting company, and every company I ever created was based on need. So I created the consulting company because I was starting to get a lot of requests from other insurance agents to mentor them, to start teaching them, to help them out with with a certain problem they might be facing in their business. I was doing it at first at no charge for folks. And I think what really dawned on me was it started to take more and more of my time to where I was having trouble getting things done. And I was like, okay, I can't just do this for free anymore. So it almost like that company became it was created because of a need, right? That was had. A couple of years later, I started being asked to attend a lot of insurance industry events, asked to speak on stages and things like that. And so I started attending a lot of these events, which I'd never really done before. And I started noticing that there were things I loved about how they did things, but there were also areas where I was like, if I was running the event, I wouldn't do it this way. I'd do it this way. I'd do this differently. I'd do that differently. And then eventually I got to the point where I'm like, why don't we run our own event? So we started doing a yearly conference. This year will be year 4 of the conference. It's actually happening in June in the next couple months. Slowly but surely over time, these two companies were subsidiary companies that were created, and they're owned by my insurance agency. Now, the lead company and the virtual assistant company happened. My company actually merged with another company in January of 2024, so almost a year and a half ago now. The founder of that company, who's my business partner today, his name is Glenn. And around the same time I started my insurance agency, he started his lead company. And then a couple years before that, kind of similarly, he created a sister company to that, which ended up being the virtual assistant company. So he had those two companies already kind of established and doing pretty well. And we kind of started to have conversations. We had been friends for a lot of years, and we had done a lot of business together. My agency was a customer of his on the lead side. So we would buy leads from his company for many years. So we started having conversations about maybe it would make sense for the companies to merge. There was a lot of synergy, with what they did and what we did. We had a lot in common. And so when I talk about power moves, like partnerships is definitely a power move. Where they make sense. I think you have to be very careful. It's like getting married in business. You marry the wrong person, your life can kind of plunge into chaos in sorts. Same thing with a business partner. But those companies came because of that merger. And so the way it ended up working out is, him and I split equity of the insurance agency. And today, the insurance agency owns the two companies that he created. So the lead company and the marketing and the virtual assistant company, and my consulting and training company and the event company. And then him and I share equity and ownership in the insurance agency. So that's where that came from. It came from a merger, actually. There weren't companies that I started, but I have ownership in today.
And what problem exists in the world today that you would like to solve?
I'll tell you one of each. I'll tell you one that's specific to my industry, and then I'll tell you one that's maybe more of a broad one, because I have a couple. In my industry in particular, the problem I would love to solve is there's a huge failure rate in what I do, a huge failure rate of insurance agents. Depending on your source, anywhere between 90 to 95% of agents that get their license are out of the business entirely within 3 years of getting their license. The failure rate is enormous. So I would love to shrink that failure rate. I'd love to grow the success rate of that to where that's not such a huge number, a 90 to 95% fail rate. And that's something I'm very passionate about. And I think the only way to do that is for my insurance agency to be a shining example. And then through our various sources of partnering with other agents and doing consulting, we can kind of help other agents and agencies turn their ship around, if you will. My broad one is I would love, through our efforts from a domino effect, whether it be from my agency to agencies that we partner with, who we train, who we consult with, to really just be a shining light for people in their healthcare and their insurance needs and things like that. I think so often when I see people that struggle with their insurance, it comes from a lack of understanding or they're on the wrong plan. It's almost all the time. And so I feel like the way that we do things, we have such a customer first mantra. We really care about the needs of our clients and our customers and everything like that. I would love to think that we're contributing to a compounding effect that between us, and there's about 600 agents we partner with across the country as of now. I like to think we can provide a lasting compounding effect on helping people not have the same issues with their insurance to where they're getting screwed out of getting their prescriptions filled, or they're not having something covered that they needed to get covered. And they're just not running into these horror situations that you might hear about. And we end up kind of changing that trend. And let's face it, a lot of people look at insurance agents by having a bad reputation or a bad name. I would love to change that perception. I don't think everybody has that perception, but too many people do. And I think we can kind of, as a unit, start to shift the perception of we're an asset for the client. We're an asset for the client, and we make their lives better and we do good for them more than anything else.
And why do you think that there's a rate of individuals getting out after 3 years? What do you attribute that to?
It's a tricky question, but I think it's a combination of things. So I think it's a combination of bad training, bad mentorship, bad guidance right off the bat. I think that's a huge part of it. I also think a lot of people look at insurance as kind of like a side gig, a side hustle type of thing, like there was a guy that I saw online a couple of years ago, and I don't know what he's doing now, but for a couple of years there, he was on TikTok, making TikToks about like money he was making selling insurance, and so he was like bringing people into the business that wanted this like side hustle, laptop lifestyle type of business, and my whole thing at the time was I was like, this is not Uber. This is not like you turn it on when you want to work, you turn it on. Like this is a full-time career if you want it to go anywhere. I've never seen anybody do it part-time on a long-term basis and make it. It's just never seen it. So I think people getting in with the wrong expectations, thinking it's something other than what it is. There's a lot of multi-level marketing insurance companies as well that bring people into the business from a multi-level marketing perspective. So maybe it's like they're in the wrong vehicle. I think others, get in expectations of the work they're going to put in. And I think a lot of people just aren't prepared to do that work. There's a lot of people I see that they have everything they need from a resource perspective, from a training perspective, to a vehicle and opportunity perspective, and they just don't do the work. And I don't think anything good comes in any business without doing the work.
Advice you wish you had followed?
Man, I love that question. That's a great one. I would say for me, advice that I wish I had followed. So early on in my career, I was 21, 22, 23. And in my early years, right, like insurance is a long-term game, building an insurance agency and insurance clientele. It's not that I ever got out of insurance, but in my early years, I got distracted, is what I would say. I would get into doing something on the side and trying to make a little extra income. And this is one thing I think is huge for entrepreneurs to hear. You hear all the time of like these people online, mentors, people like that, they talk about like multiple streams of income. And at the time, I thought I needed multiple streams of income. The problem was I didn't even have one stream of income, right? Like people talk about multiple streams of income, like they're talking about like, you look at like take your pick, right? A Jeff Bezos, right? Jeff Bezos had one company, he scaled to the moon, and that company owned a bunch of other companies before he started doing what he's doing now with Blue Origin, right? You look at like an Elon Musk, right? Elon Musk did one thing in PayPal, sold it for billions, and then he invested into two companies, right? Like, so I think at the time I was like, oh, I need multiple streams of income. That was really bad. Not that I was given that advice that I needed that. It's just that was my perception of like what I was reading, seeing online, like the entrepreneur hustle culture when at that point in time. And I was told by mentors of mine in the insurance industry at the time is you need to focus on what you're doing. You need to cut out distractions. And I didn't take that advice for a couple of years. And I think that just kind of slowed down the progress and slowed down the growth. So when people are talking about multiple streams of income, they're talking about like other businesses when your business can run itself. They're talking about investments you can make that are passive investments, right? Like, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs, and I see it sometimes when they're younger, they make the same mistake I did where you're trying to get multiple streams of income. And what you end up doing is you have and it ends up being no different than if you had 2 or 3 jobs. And that's no pathway to success.
How do you define success?
So for me, I would define success as, this is a tricky question that I've had very spirited conversations with a lot of my peers over the years. So my definition of success would be making a huge impact in some kind of way. Because I don't think you can necessarily just put monetary success at the forefront of things. Now, for me personally, like I want to do well monetarily to be successful. I want my company to do well, my company to be profitable, all of those things. I want to be able to offer more opportunities to my employees, to my staff, to our agents, everything like that. But I think having a way to make a huge impact in whatever you're doing. And oftentimes in business, if you're able to do that, usually the monetary part of it follows. But like you think about a lot of people that have had huge impact in the world, not all of them did it through monetary success. You could look at people like Gandhi, Mother Teresa. You can't tell me that those people weren't successful, but they did it in a way that monetary success was not the driving force. Their driving force was making an impact on the world. And so I think if you're making an impact on the world, I think you can be classified as success. To me, a successful life is I want to be successful in everything that I do, in all areas of my life. I want to be a good husband. I'm married. I have a 5-year-old. I have another one on the way, 2 months away. I want to be a good father. I want to be a good employer. I want to be a good partner in business. I want to be a good mentor. I want to be successful in everything that I do. I think it's a mindset really to where everything that you decide to do, if you're going to decide to do it, make sure that you can do it at the fullest capacity. And if you can't, or there's doubt there, maybe you should take a pause and look into yourself and see what might be causing you to hesitate if you don't feel confident that you can execute on that at a really high level. That would be my definition of success, really. It's just success in everything you do, a mindset, but most of all, impact. Are you making huge impact in what it is that you do?
And how do you make impact daily, Christian?
I think our company makes impact with our clients. We have a huge client satisfaction rate. In our industry, it's pretty common for agencies to lose 15, 20, 25% of their clients every year. For us, we keep 98% of our clients every year, 97, 98% of our clients each year. And that's because our clients enjoy working with us. We provide a great client experience. We handle their problems. If they have a claim problem come up, we are getting right in the thick of it and trying to help resolve that claim problem and trying to get the insurance to pay what it's supposed to pay. I think we're providing daily impact with those types of things. We've helped so many insurance agents and agencies grow and become massively successful. And I think that's compounding impact because they're helping their clients in the same way we're helping ours, right? So we're touching more lives in that way. So I think we're helping insurance agencies and agents find success and find a lasting way to keep their businesses growing and relevant. And then I think we're helping countless policyholders make sure that they're in the best spot they can possibly be, and they're not being crippled by being in the wrong policy or not having something paid out correctly. So I think there's a lot of ways we provide impact, but those are probably the two that come to mind that we do on an everyday basis.
Talk about entrepreneurship and marriage and being a father.
It's tricky. It's tough. I think anyone that would tell you any differently is probably lying to you. They're probably trying to sell you something into a program or something. But for me, people like to use the word balance. I'm not a big fan of that word personally. I don't necessarily think you can have perfect balance ever if you want to be an entrepreneur and have a family. For me, the only reason I've been able to do everything that I do, and I do make a lot of time for my family, I make time for my children, make time for my wife, but the only reason I'm able to do what I do is that my wife and I are aligned, right? We're aligned. We're on the same page with where we're trying to go, with where the company is trying to go, and she believes in me. And I think that is so huge. I couldn't tell you how many, because when an insurance agent gets their license and they try to spin up an agency, they are going down an entrepreneurial journey. They're starting a business. They're opening their own business in that sector. And I couldn't tell you how many times I've seen situations where somebody literally gets out of the business because their spouse is just not on the same page, and it causes countless arguments. That's crippling. That's hell to go through. It's hell enough to go through the struggles of growing a business early on. It's just 10 times worse if you're going through that, plus you have a critical spouse or a spouse that doesn't believe in what you're doing and is constantly telling you should go get a job or go do something else, right? So I think you have to be united. You have to be on the same page. I'm very blessed to have my wife. Our quick little story is, we started dating 6 months before I got my insurance license. And I was living in an apartment at the time. I was a kid, remember this. I was 20 years old at the time. And I had roommates, and I was working a job making $9.50 an hour. And my roommates bailed on me. It was like a 3-bedroom apartment. It was way more than I could have afforded by myself. So they bailed on me. We had, I don't know how much time left on the lease, 5 months, 6 months, something like that. And it was a possibility that if I couldn't make the rent payment, it would go on my credit, and it would prevent me from getting my license, because they check background, they check credit. You have to be pretty squeaky clean to get an insurance license in a lot of states. My wife at the time, we'd only been dating a little while. She started working overtime at her job and moved in with me and helped me pay the bills and helped me make rent and helped me get through that situation. So she always believed in me from the beginning, from the start, even when I wasn't worth a damn. I couldn't imagine being where I am without her support all along the way. She's always been my biggest supporter, my biggest cheerleader, and I wouldn't be where I am without her. And so I think if you're married and you're listening to this, I think it's imperative that you and your spouse are on the same page as much as possible, that you believe together in what you're trying to do and you believe in the vision of where you're trying to go. Otherwise, your chance of failure, I think, just gets that much higher.
And thank you, Christian, for your transparency in that regarding the relationship, the marriage, and how that came about. And we know in business, there's a lot of ebb and flows. There's a lot of ups and downs. I like to spin it in terms of an opportunity. Some call it a risk. Talk about that moment in business. Some can call it a worst moment in business. And what was your takeaway?
Yeah, I think my worst moment in business was, in the early years of my career, I had not gotten to a place where I had really mastered marketing. If you're a young business owner, one of the best investments that you can make of time and potentially maybe even money is by learning how to market, whether it be grassroots marketing, but more than anything else, probably learning digital marketing, just learning marketing as an art form, because there's so many different ways you can market your business. At the time, I didn't know marketing. I didn't know anything about marketing. And so my sales would ebb and flow based off of leads I was purchasing or cold calls I was making. I was doing a lot of down and dirty work in terms of getting in front of potential clients. I went through a time where I think it was my second or third year in the business. And at this time, we were 100% living off of my salary. After about a year or two, my wife quit her job. She stayed home. And, we were doing okay. But there was a month there where we weren't doing okay. I remember very vividly in the second year where I just went into a sales slump as an agent. And any salesperson that's listening to this, you might have gone through this yourself. And if you haven't and you're relatively new, you probably will at some point, to where it just seemed like no matter what I did, I couldn't get a new client done. I couldn't get a new deal done. I couldn't get any policies sold. I went through that slump, and it was a real eye-opener for me. So to talk about what I learned, I remember being very frustrated, just feeling very hopeless, like there's nothing I could do about it. And I was working extra hard. I was putting more hours in than ever, trying to break this slump. And what it really came down to me, and what I realized at that time is I need to learn how to make this easier for myself. There must be an easier way to grow my business. And the answer to that ended up being I needed to learn how to market. I needed to learn how to market. I needed to learn how to drive business to my company through my marketing. And that kind of set me down a journey of kind of learning marketing and, learning how to market my business and making it to where sales was important, but it wasn't like you're trying to squeeze water out of a rock at all times in your sales, situations. And so, yeah, that was kind of what came out of it for me is I finally learned it's time to find ways to work smarter and not harder. And so I really went down a journey of learning how to be a smarter entrepreneur and a smarter business person. And a huge part of that was learning marketing.
And speaking of marketing and digital marketing, and when you think about that, and earlier you mentioned about Gary Vaynerchuk, and there's others that have been in this marketing game for a very, very long time. Talk about marketing in 2025 and marketing, say, 2 or 3 years ago. Even as a podcaster, you're a podcaster, and I want you to definitely share about your podcast and how they can listen. When I think about, I started my podcast 8 years ago, and I'm glad that I learned the ins and outs of podcasting, but you can start a podcaster faster today than you could 8 years ago. So I want you to bring that full circle, Christian, regarding marketing. Is that information that they learned, digital marketing, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, is it relevant? Or what would you say would be the best advice when you're talking to those solo entrepreneurs or those who are trying to learn marketing and they don't have the funds to invest?
Yeah, I love that. I think some of the things that you might, if you've learned things quite some time ago, 8, 9 years ago, there's things I learned 8, 9 years ago that are still relevant today that are just marketing trade secrets, for example. Like there's other things that might just be outdated information, like how algorithms work as an example. Or maybe like a blueprint of creating a podcast. But at the end of the day, like for us, what we found great success in is in a balance of paid marketing and organic marketing. So like what we're doing right now on this podcast is a great example of organic marketing, right? Creating a podcast, content creation is a great example of organic marketing. And you can go very far if you do organic marketing correctly. It's just you have to understand, to me, the rules of the game today versus where they were 5 years ago. So like I would say maybe 5 years ago, if you had a message and you had something to say, you probably could have created a podcast on a hosting platform and you could get an audience just by putting it out there. You didn't even, maybe it wouldn't even be video. Right? Maybe it's just audio. I'm sure you kind of went through this yourself, right? And that could be all you put out. And you could grow an audience from that. I feel like today in 2025, I think the people that are really doing well in podcasting, and you're doing an amazing job, so, you clearly know what you're doing. But I feel like today it's so much more about having your podcast available on as many platforms as possible. So you have it on audio only, but you also want it on video hosting platforms. You want it on YouTube, you want it on Rumble, you want it on Spotify as a video podcast, all of these different places. And then for us, what we've found that, the biggest podcasts are doing that we've tried to replicate is repurposing your content. How much can you repurpose an episode of your podcast? Let's say you do a podcast and it's an hour. So we do 4 podcasts a week on the Seven Figures or Bust podcast, and they're an hour each time. We do it live 4 days a week, and then it goes live on 3 platforms. It goes live in our Facebook group for agents. It's got about 10,000 agents in it right now. It goes live on a LinkedIn account. It goes live on an X account. And then we take the replay and we put the replay up on 15 or 20 audio only platforms. The replay goes up on YouTube. It goes up on Rumble. It goes up on a bunch of other platforms. Then we're cutting up our podcast. So we're taking 5 to 10 minute clips of us talking about a certain topic. That goes out on YouTube and other places. We're doing 30 to 60 second clips and we're putting them up on Instagram as Reels. We're putting them on Facebook as Reels. We're putting them up on multiple different platforms. So I think today it's a lot more about how can you blast your podcast out in every different medium and every different content type possible. And that's how your podcast is going to reach the most people, right? Because there's kids that maybe your target audience is 18 to 25-year-olds. Well, a lot of your target audience, they might be on TikTok and they might only consume your content if it's on TikTok and 30 seconds or 45 seconds. So are you taking clips of your show that you have something to say that's a 30 to 45 second segment, if you will, and you're putting that up on TikTok? You might reach viewers that way that you'd never reach just by uploading an audio only podcast, or maybe you're uploading it just a full video on YouTube. So I think today it's definitely easier to start a show today from scratch. There's so many tools, so many resources available, but I think the people that are really winning is they're finding the most creative ways to repurpose that content to allow it to reach more different diverse groups of people on more platforms. And to answer the latter part of your question, for us, you can find the Seven Figures or Bust podcast anywhere that you can find podcasts. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Sirius XM, YouTube, of course, Rumble, X, LinkedIn. You can find it in our Facebook group. And we started doing the 4 episodes a week thing in January. So we're going on about 4 or 5 months of that so far. And, we're still growing, but across all the platforms, we're probably at about 150,000 listens, so far this year. And we believe we can go a lot more than that. It's a very niche podcast. It's insurance agent specific, but we're really happy with that. Because I remember I started my first podcast ever. It was actually a Medicare podcast for consumers. It's called the Everything Medicare Podcast. If anybody wants to go listen to it, you can still find it today. And it was for Medicare consumers. It was designed to educate Medicare consumers, seniors, people 65 and older, about their Medicare options. And I started it in 2018. And we still upload a new episode every now and then. And I believe it's still the #1 podcast for Medicare in the country. Still, I think if you Google Medicare podcast, it's going to come up #1, if not #2. There might be another one that pops up. But at that point in time, all that I was doing was I was recording myself audio and uploading the audio for the first year of doing that podcast because I didn't know any better. I didn't know how to do video podcasts. I was very green. And we developed a real audience just from doing that. I feel like today you have to I think the best podcasts are getting the video right and they're getting it across multiple platforms.
Thank you for that. If you conducted this interview, what is the one question you would have asked yourself? I'd like you to ask the question and answer it.
That's a great question. The one question I'd probably ask myself is, how high do I want my company to go? So our company now, is in the multiple 7-figure range. Probably in the next 2 years, we're on a trajectory to hit do 8 figures in revenue every year. We're on that pathway. I think for us, the sky's the limit of what I think the company can do. I love how, we are very diversified, but all of our income streams and all of our companies do tie back together. They all relate to one another. So they almost help each other in a sense. I would love for our company to continue to help more people, make an impact. Maybe we even do a sale at some point. Maybe we do a private equity acquisition of some kind. And I've always envisioned that we could do eventually a 100 million exit. That would be kind of ideal for us. We'll see where things go. Opportunities are kind of based on timing with those types of things. But if we ever did do something like that, it would only be with a partner that kind of shared our vision and kind of, with the way that we do business, with the way we handle our clients, with the way we take care of them, with the way we work with our agents. But yeah, I think the sky's the limit for what we can do and where I think the company's going.
Now, did your dad retire out of the business?
Yes. Yeah. So 3 years ago, we bought his agency. At the time, my dad built his agency by the sweat of his brow, as they say. And so I learned a lot from my dad, but I also learned what I didn't want. My dad never wanted to get too big. He never had more than one part-time employee. He didn't want to grow. After he had gotten to about 15 years in his career, he just stopped growing and just started coasting. So by the time we bought his agency, probably 8 years prior to when I started, his clientele had probably shrunk by over 50% from what it was. It had died off significantly. And he didn't have any employees at the time that we bought his business. He was trying to do everything himself. And, my dad is in his 70s now. I think he was just ready to be done. He wanted a way out. And so, I offered to buy his company. We had a very unorthodox start because most of the time, especially in my business, in my industry, when people bring their kids into the industry, they bring them in to be part of their company so that they can bring new ideas, maybe someday the kid takes over the company and that kind of thing. But it's always the parents' company. They call the shots. Well, my dad didn't want to do that. And, maybe he was looking out for me. I think it had more to do with I was 21 and I was a knucklehead. And I think he was worried I'd do something dumb and embarrass his company. So I had my own company from the get-go. And he kind of just was an early mentor for me and helped me kind of learn the basics and how to get started. And then it became clear after 5 or 6 years that my company was bigger than his. It was doing more business than his. It was on a growth path. And then a couple of years after that, it became apparent that he didn't want to do this anymore. And it just made sense for us to just buy his company entirely. So that's what we ended up doing. So yeah, he's kind of out of the business now. He's retired.
Thank you for that. We've come to the part of our business. It's called the interview called Rapid Round of Fun. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I'd like you to give me very quick answers. And if you choose not to answer something, say pass. Are you ready for the rapid round of fun?
I am ready.
What is your favorite comfort food?
Pizza.
The last movie you saw?
The Accountant 2.
You relax doing what?
Usually watching a movie with my wife, with my daughter.
Your favorite singer?
Probably Axl Rose.
Your favorite dance song?
Anything from the 90s, any of those cheesy 90s hip-hop songs like Ice Ice Baby or something like that. They're the best.
What food you eat every week, no matter what?
Eggs. I'm on a very strict no sugar, no bread diet now, and eggs is a healthy fat that I can eat. So I eat eggs every single day.
Work out or hit the couch?
Work out.
Christian, thank you so much for joining us on Black Entrepreneur Experience Podcast. Before we let you go, share with our audience the best way for them to connect with you and to do business with you. Feel free to leave all your social media handles.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a pleasure. I had a great time and I really appreciate you having me on. The best place you can find us, if, depending on whether you are an insurance agent, you're interested in learning about becoming an insurance agent, or maybe you need help with a policy or you have a family member that needs help with a policy, we can help with any of the above. The best place to find us is at eseniorinsurance.com. If you're interested in becoming an agent, you can find information on my YouTube channel, which is just at Christian Brindle. You can follow me on Instagram at Christian Brindle, or you can join our private Facebook group for insurance agents called Seven Figure Medicare Agent. And those are probably the best places.
Thank you, Christian. That's a wrap.
Thank you for listening and subscribing to Black Entrepreneur Experience. We would love for you to leave a review and rating on iTunes and share with your friends. For show notes and more episodes, go to www.beepodcast.com. Join us next Wednesday, and remember, green is the new black. So keep your bank accounts and your business in the black.